Good morning, everybody. Here we go. It is time for some reading, and I should really put some music on to get us started, shouldn't I? Let's very quickly do this because I think that's good. Here we go. Let's put on some music. What's good? What's good? Oh, I like this song. Here we go. Oh, we still got internet. This is good.
Choose to express yourself.
Okay, so we're going to be reading, but I just wanted to set the mood. Oh, formerly part of a largely niche service. What a great name. I'm very confused, but I followed you, so send me a message. Let me know what that all means. Okay, so we're going to be reading. And Rich Dad Poor Dad's book that I'm supposed to be reading, but I only have the Chinese version. And we're still in lockdown and I haven't ordered it. So we're going to be reading this book here, The Art of Thinking Clearly, which is a really good thing to be doing. So, and good morning, JC. There you go. Oh, look at the song. My name. I don't remember the words of the song. Okay. It comes naturally, baby. Okay, we'll start turning off the music. And IQ Films, that's also a cool name. Good to meet you too. Okay, we're gonna go to The Art of Thinking Clearly. And what chapter are we up to? We read chapter 9, I think it was yesterday, or 8? 8. Murder Your Darlings. Confirmation Bias Part 2. Today it is chapter 9. Don't bow to authority. And actually, I'm gonna leave some music in the background. What do you think? Okay, chapter 9. Don't bow to authority. The authority bias. Actually, that might be a bit much of the music. There we go. Okay. The first book of the Bible explains what happens when we disobey a great authority. We get ejected from paradise. This is also what less celestial authorities would have us believe. Political pundits, scientists, doctors, CEOs, economists, government heads, sports commentators, consultants, and stock market gurus. Authorities pose two main problems to clear thinking. First, their track records are often sobering. That is very true. We have. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And we're still recording. This is crazy. Okay, so the computer just dropped out, but we are still reading. We might start from the beginning. If everybody's okay, we're going to start reading again. Okay. So chapter 9, don't bow to authority, authority bias. The first book of the Bible explains what happens when we disobey a great authority. We get ejected from paradise. This is also what less celestial authorities would have us believe. Political pundits, scientists, doctors, CEOs, economists, government heads, sport commentators, consultants, and stock market gurus. Authorities pose two main problems to clear thinking. First, their track records are sobering, and that is very, very true. Don't tell them though; they wouldn't be happy. There are about 1 million trained economists on the planet, and not one of them could accurately predict the timing of the 2008 financial crisis, with the exception of Nouriel Roubini and Nassim Taleb. And then there are also non-economists who've managed to predict it, who are on the movie The Big Short, which is really cool. Let alone how the collapse would play out, from the real estate bubble bursting to credit default swaps collapsing, right through to the full-blown economic crunch. I actually made a video on YouTube as well on what might be coming up in the future based on some of those things as well. And thank you for everybody that's sending me love hearts and different other things while we are doing this. Okay. So never has a group of experts failed so spectacularly. The story from the medical world is much the same. Up until 1900, it was discernibly wiser for patients to avoid doctor's visits, which is exactly what I do. Just don't go, never go. Too often, the treatment only worsened the illness due to poor hygiene and folk practices such as bloodletting. Psychologist Stanley Milgram demonstrated the authority bias most clearly in an experiment in 1961. This one's a very famous experiment. His subjects were instructed to administer ever-increasing electrical shocks to a person sitting on the other side of a pane of glass. Have you ever heard of this one before? This one is very interesting, what humans will do when they get pushed to their limits and really have the authority pushed down their throats. Ah, yes. So they were told to start with 15 volts, then 30 volts, 45 volts, and so on until they reached the maximum, a lethal dose of 450 volts. In reality, no electric current was actually flowing. Milgram used an actor to play the role of victim, but those charged with administering the shocks didn't know that. The results were, well, shocking. I love the humor in this book sometimes. As the person in the other room wailed and writhed in pain, and the subject administered the shock wanted to stop, the professor would say, "Keep going, the experiment depends on it." The majority of people continued with the electrocution. More than half of the participants went all the way up to maximum voltage out of sheer obedience to authority. How scary is that? We'll talk about this over in a bit. Over the past decade, airlines have also learned the dangers of the authority bias. In the old days, the captain was king. His commands were not to be doubted. If a co-pilot suspected an oversight, he wouldn't have dared to address it out of respect for or fear of his captain. Since this behavior was discovered, nearly every airline has executed crew resource management, which coaches pilots and their crews to discuss any reservations they have openly and quickly. In other words, they carefully deprogram the authority bias. CRM has contributed more to flight safety in the past 20 years than any technical advances have. And this is very true, especially, for example, where cultures maintain that you have to respect your elders. As an example, there is a famous incident with a Korean airline where the co-pilot knew that there was an error, but he wouldn't tell his pilot because he wouldn't tell the captain because he felt that he wasn't allowed to. And it resulted in some really big issues until they had to sort that out. And they had to change the cultural programming of captains and co-pilots to be not Korean at all in order to be able to get past that. Many companies are light years from this sort of foresight. Especially at risk are firms with domineering CEOs where employees are likely to keep their lesser opinions to themselves, much to the detriment of the business. It is so good to get opinions in business and to get your staff to actually share ideas with you, because I could go into it for a whole day probably, but as a business owner, getting ideas from your staff is so powerful and so good. I love it when my staff give me ideas. So yeah, I can't say more about that. It's just too good. Authorities crave recognition and constantly find ways to reinforce their status. Doctors and research sport white coaches. Can't read this morning. Doctors and researchers sport white coats. Bank directors don suits and ties. Kings wear crowns. Members of the military wield rank badges. Today, even more symbols and props are used to signal expertise, from appearances on talk shows and on the cover of magazines to book tours and their own Wikipedia entries. Authority changes much like fashion does, and society follows it just as much. That being said, it is good to be a leader. It is good to be able to take responsibility, but you need to be able to stay humble and be able to take the opinions of other people so that you can get the information that you need and get ideas and get innovations that your staff are also going to have. Because I will always say that as humans, we are not perfect and we can't do anything completely by ourselves. We need other people around us in order to be able to assist us. And the way humans function best is when we are collaborating. And so there's actually a book that I was reading recently called The Wisdom of Yourselves by Bruce Lipton. And he talks about the fact that in nature, it's not survival of the fittest. Darwin wasn't actually correct in that. It's actually the collaborators that survive. So the more animals work together, the more that they assist each other, the more that they're going to survive, and they will create the mutations that they need in order to be able to survive a changing environment. But that's another book for another day. Right now, we're still reading this one. So in conclusion, Whenever you're about to make a decision, think about which authority figures might be exerting an influence on your reasoning. And when you encounter one in the flesh, do your best to challenge him or her. And I think this is a very poignant, very important one to think about when we are thinking about the coronavirus and everything else. Don't just take anything at face value. You need to really separate that out and think about different opinions. And a perfect example, and I'm going to use something that I was going to make a video about anyhow. I have this seaweed and I eat a lot of this. And the reason for it is I never go to the doctor, but somebody told me that I've been vegetarian for 8 years. I hadn't been to the doctor for probably about 10, 11, 12 years, something like that. So somebody said, you might be good to go and get your B12 levels checked out, because vegetarians usually have a low B12. So I went to the doctor and my B12 wasn't super low. It was a little bit lower. So I went to the doctor and she said, it might be a good idea for you to start supplementing. She said, it's impossible for vegetarians to get B12 from a plant-based diet because plants don't contain B12. You can only get it from meat. Now, I could have taken that advice and taken supplements, which I don't like and I don't do generally. So I challenged her and I had a look and I said, okay, let's do some research. And I started doing my own research. Now, I could have taken an authority's ideas directly, just straight, just not question it at all. But that's not what I did. I actually took the time to do my own research. So I looked at both sides, which I find very important. Look at things that you already believe in and also things that you might not necessarily believe in to see whether you can find some proofs to change your opinion, change your ideas. So I did that. And it turns out that I found out that there is quite a lot of B12 in seaweed. So I eat quite a lot of seaweed as a vegetarian now. And I actually need to go back and get tested. I just never go to the doctor, so I've never gone back to get tested. But if your B12 is very low, then you should be extremely tired and anemic. And I walk about 40,000 steps a day. I go running. I do all sorts of different things. I swim in cold, freezing, frigid water, and I absolutely love it. So if I really had a problem with my B12, I should be tired and not as energetic and strong as I am. So on that note, that was chapter 9, I think it was. Yes, chapter 9 of The Art of Thinking Clearly. It is amazing reading for you. And yeah, we got some really good, interesting lessons out of this today. And also, the last thing that I want to share is that it's really important to avoid this one. This is one of the ones that I really want to go in a little bit deeper on, because the authority bias, very often we will listen to experts and just take on blindly whatever they say. So it's really important to make sure that you don't do that. And the Milgram experiment from the book that we just read is such a great example of that. So people administered fatal doses. 50% of the people that were in the experiment administered fatal doses to people, even though it wasn't real. But anyway, they were willing to put the voltage up to 450 volts and kill somebody for the sake of the experiment just because an expert told them. So in your life, there are things that they might tell you that could not only kill somebody else, but could kill yourself if you, and we could talk financially, kill you literally. It's really important not to just take somebody who is an expert and just follow their advice blindly. If you are investing, make sure that you listen to the experts, but also do your own research. Don't just follow somebody blindly. If you are thinking about health, listen to the experts, but also do some own research and question everything. Ask questions so that you don't fall for that and don't end up like somebody in Milgram's experiment where they practically killed somebody or were willing to do something that's detrimental in one way, shape, or form. So that's where I'm going to leave it, because that's a bit of a sad one. So we might just see. There we go. We'll turn the music back on, get back into a good vibe after a bit of a sad ending to the chapter 9 of The Art of Thinking Clearly. Okay, have a great day, everyone. I will see you again tomorrow for chapter. Hang on a minute. What's this? Chapter 10. Leave your supermodel friends at home. The contrast effect. I'll see you then. a week.